So I'm not sure where I'm posting this, but in any case, it's been a while. I really want to share this project that I've been working on. It is kind of my first foray into game development. So a few years ago, I really started wanting more from my experience with games, and it was partially because, games were coming out in really bad states. You always have the idea for your like dream game, your perfect game, and you try playing things looking for that feeling, and you remember feelings from games in the past that you've played before, and you start wanting to have more control over that experience. So I started playing games like Fallout and Stalker and Skyrim, and really exploring kind of the depth of community made content. And it was all in the service of like customizing my experience. I didn't have any way of understanding how to make the content that I wanted. But I do know that there are thousands and thousands of mod developers who have made pretty much anything you can think of to customize your experience to your liking. I started to really feel like I had like a project car in my garage. The more mods I could fit into my list and keep everything working and not breaking. I mean, most of them still break. My current Stalker build, which I've recently started making my own mods for, crashes pretty much like once or twice a play session, either due to like a character having a shader that I accidentally deleted, or a spawn triggering some type of item that is conflicting with another item. But I loved the ability to have this like tailored experience and to be able to change it at will and really have this modular game at your disposal. And because of investing time into this, I started to, really build this as like probably one of my first hobbies. I would say most of the time in my life when I've gotten interested in something, I try to turn it into a profession immediately. Over the last few years, I started really exploring what the limits of modding was, and started to really understand what kind of game I want to play. So in 2021, I was dealing with a lot of mental health struggles. And during that time, I started to, make some YouTube videos, which you may have seen. I started to learn Unity because I felt like that was the most accessible engine to learn, and make a few little games here and there, like, really simple things like a parkour maze or like a top-down shooter. Because of this kind of understanding that I was developing, I started getting an idea for, a really big project. So in the beginning, I had no experience with code. I had done some HTML when I was like in middle school. That was on like Windows Vista. So the logic required to really implement code, once you learn how to write it, I could learn scripts. I could, copy what people did. But the logic involved in understanding like what I was actually doing when I would run certain functions or like name certain classes was just not there. And it became a real effort for me to, kind of bash together all these different like spaghetti strings of code and assets and packs. One thing that does help me is I've been working with Blender for years, and I am an artist myself, so I have a lot of experience with the visuals, but I've always been aware of the fact that like I really shouldn't put time into the visuals until I have the actual game together. Though I like seeing things, so sometimes it's nice to be able to see something quickly. But this process of like bashing together my whole project became really tedious. I started over so many times because I kept being like, oh, this made things really complicated and now I'm over my head. So let me simplify by removing this asset pack that I'm using. And by removing it, it then breaks the whole project. And without the real comprehension of what I was adding and taking away, I wasn't able to get myself back to like point A. And so I eventually stopped stopped trying to work with Unity. I decided that like maybe the game that I'm thinking of, it would be better served for me to write a story, because I also like writing a lot, and explore like the conceptual side of the narrative for the game. And I came out with a pretty solid story. It's only like halfway done. I did stop on that as well. It was a pretty strong starting point for understanding the concept and the structure of the world I'm creating. One big caveat for everything I'm making is that the idea for the game that I want to make and want to play is a multiplayer game, and it has a lot of branching elements. Over time, I have found ways to simplify this structure so that the gameplay loop isn't going to expand. So scope is definitely something that I'm trying to keep like a tight rein on, because it has the potential to be a massive project. But it's only a two-person multiplayer game. So 1v1. I have talked to friends about making it possible to add a third person, just because I want to play with multiple friends at once. But have described it as a campaign-based PvP game. And it's like a campaign-based PvP RPG. So in essence, the game loop boils down to two people join a match, a server peer-to-peer. I'm using Steam subsystem right now, and it's only available to your friends. I haven't tested it much. Still really early in development, but it's just 1v1. So I'm kind of thinking of this as like a game you play with your friend. Not like some type of like global matchmaking, like competitive thing. You each play through your own campaign, individual single player campaign. And that campaign will take 3 or 4 different quests from an array. And this will be a selection from a much larger index of quests. And as you complete these quests, you start to develop relationships with the world around you, kind of taking inspiration from, various games' faction systems. I am a huge Stalker fan, so I do have a whole system set up for faction relations, though I think the game loop is going to be, at most 45 minutes. Like, I want this to be like a single session that you play through, like kind of like a roguelite or a procedurally generated game. But I have built this system because I wanted to, and it was fun. And that's pretty much how I've learned to do anything with game development, is I wanted to see something happen. So I did everything I could to find information on how to make it happen. But this system does allow for the player, as they complete quests, as they do certain actions within the world, kill certain enemies, kill certain allies, take quests, complete quests, talk to certain people, do certain things within the world. I can influence this faction relation for at least the player. I'd love to implement it for the AI themselves, but I'm not trying to recreate the A life system right now. So once all those missions are completed, you are then brought into a multiplayer map. It'll be one of the various maps, and you'll just kind of be brought there. It'll probably initiate a final quest based on your relationship to the other player. And my solution for this right now is pretty rudimentary. I just have a time limit for 3 different sections of the game. One I'm calling like questing, so that's where you do your first couple quests. Then the second section is politics, so that's how you really start to define your relationship to the world. And then the third is the multiplayer section. And the multiplayer section, I think, is really interesting in the sense that depending on how you align with your friend, you may be on their side, and then you will go and fight like a final boss or do a final mission together. Or you might be on opposing factions. And if you're on opposing factions, it then becomes more of a PvP, like 1v1 experience within this final multiplayer map. with the implementation of this timeline, it does mean that you have to understand that you're going to run out of time to acquire gear, to acquire faction relationships that you might want to finish your quests. Because at the end of the timeline, it just transports you to the final mission. And I think if I have time, I'm going to remove the timeline system, because right now it's just the most simple way I can enforce the gameplay loop, but I am not really that happy with it, because I think there's probably a better way to implement this limitation and make it so that the game still has like a condensed time frame, but and like won't expand too much beyond what I want, but will still allow you to really like invest in the character that you're playing as for that moment. I do have a character selection system that I just created. So this video, I just really want to introduce the journey that I've gone through to actually be able to create these systems, because right now a lot of them are implemented pretty jankily, but I'm getting them to work. And, you know, there is a massive difference in where I'm doing this and how I'm doing this and what got me to the point that I feel like I can do this. The first step really for me was actually through looking into learning the X-Ray Engine's documentation. So the X-Ray Engine is the engine for Stalker, the Stalker franchise, the first three. Stalker 2 is coming out soon. I'm pretty stoked. But I have played Stalker Anomaly for years at this point. And at some point, you know, like a little over a year ago, I started really wanting to make a couple mods. One being a global death marker notification so that I could see on my PDA by going through the map where an NPC has died. I kind of thought this was possible. I still haven't done it. I still think it is possible. I started working on it. It was really hard and complicated. There are certain things within the maps that you're on and within the world outside of the maps that you're on that the A-Life system does keep track of. And some of them are, you know, myths, like the A-Life system, your notifications will make up things. It'll say like, oh, this person died to an anomaly, and you know they didn't. But sometimes there will be, you know, a faction is moving into, especially in warfare, there will be like factions that move into other territories and affect the world. And those are NPCs actually acting, and at least the game is keeping track of that information. So I was thinking, you know, is there a way for me to find that information and then put a marker on my map? I spent months reading really limited documentation from the modding community that is actually really, really valuable. I don't mean to say it's limited in its scope. It's just limited because, you know, it's not an official documentation. It's not everything you need. But it does have a good start for a lot of the major things that people like to mod. A lot of what you have to do to understand how things are coded in the X-Ray Engine, at least as a person who doesn't code, is read the code. So you can find the SDK and you can extract the database to your computer and have a file that has every script in the game. There are multiple scripts that have kind of the language broken down, Lua scripts. And then there are multiple like data tables and things that you can look at and understand, like the naming conventions, the ways that the game is interpreting and defining certain code. And the more you read, the more you understand. But at first it does feel like reading gibberish. And I do think you need some level of like hyperfixation to learn to code this way. I would definitely recommend, you know, like learning coding through like an actual language first. I still should do that. But, you know, my ADHD brain is committed to doing something. It will do it until it absolutely gives up. So I started writing down all of the documentation that I could find on the X-Ray Engine. And eventually I managed to make one mod, which was a guitar that you could play, and I made animations for it. It was fun. You could sit around the campfire, play guitar. That was a mod that I had been looking for years at this point. It's always been weird to me that you can pick up the guitar and play it, but like there is no guitar. It's just like audio source from one fixed location. So I made a mod that lets you play the guitar. I haven't updated it in a while, and that's because of the next step in this journey, that because I learned how to do this and I made the mod and published it, it gave me, and I had been talking to a lot of the mod developers on Anomaly Modding Discord about coding and about different ideas, and it made me realize that, like, hey, making a game is extremely possible, especially one that I want to make. You know, it might take me a lot, but, you know, I'm willing to do this while I work. I'm willing to do this and see it through. And I just have to keep the costs down, which means I have to do a lot of the stuff manually myself. I'm trying not to spend a dime. Though in the past I have spent money on assets because of what I talked about initially as like throwing together a bunch of assets, but that was in Unity. So now that I'm in Unreal, I've just been downloading the free assets every month, but I still have been trying not to use them because I realized too, from my first experience of bashing together a bunch of assets, is that when things go wrong, if I didn't make the system, I don't know how to fix it. And I'm not good enough yet to interpret other people's work. Though I do feel like I'm starting to get there, and I think a huge part of that was the effort that went into learning the documentation for Stalker. And it really like opened this door for me and enabled me to even consider taking up this project again. I chose to move into Unreal Engine because I actually found that the AI system, so in Unity, I was coding my own AI from the ground up. Like I was coding my own like behavior trees. I realized you don't have to do this. I also found that I didn't really want to invest any time into Unity just because I think I prefer Unreal. I did try Godot for a little while, but again, having no background in coding, even though I'm feeling a lot more confident now, I didn't like the feeling of starting from scratch. Unreal Engine has a really deep history for both multiplayer and FPSs, which this RPG that I'm making is an FPS of sorts, though I will say I think it's going to be a lot more politically driven. So like the politics of the world around you is going to matter more than, say, maybe the shooter elements. Though I do want the combat to feel really good when you actually get into combat. And the setting is a pretty volatile one. I'll get into the story more in the future. For right now, just know that it takes place in a civil war, and it gatekeeps and assigns quests based on your exposure to certain elements that affect your mind. That being said, I still think it's more about the politics of your experiences within the game. I like learning by making mistakes. Someone was joking with me in the Soccer Modding Discord that my script was that they could feel the anxiety brewing from my script because I had like a million print string lines of code, like debug lines of code, just to say, is this animation playing or not? Doing it this way, I found the blueprint system actually lets learn what's available. So like, since I don't know, C++ really well, if I start writing code in Visual Studio, I don't really know what's available to me in terms of functions or in terms of like the documentation for Unreal Engine. So having the blueprint node system lets me understand like, hey, I want to do this thing. Let me look up in various different wordings what kind of node I could use to make this happen. And that has made it really nice for learning how to do it. Now I don't have to do that as much, which feels really good. I'm really excited because I have started to explore in my studio practice, so I'm a painter, creating textures and assets from like my actual paintings and scanning them into my computer and using them as the rendered assets for, you know, the world and the trees and the ground. And I've created these systems that kind of construct, you know, trees and tree branches from 2D assets. So it has a very, there are a couple games that come to mind, one being Forgive Me Father and the other being The Explorator. This summer I did a game jam with my friend Kyle, and we made a game that implemented this style of art. It feels very, you know, related to like boomer shooters, like old school 2D art within a 3D world. Now I'm expanding on that system so that I can incorporate my actual painting practice into the game. And that's super exciting for me as well, because I'm a lot faster at physical media in terms of like actually making the final render of the game. I want most assets to be physically painted. I realize that it is maybe a really convoluted way of doing it rather than just getting good at painting on my tablet. But I also think it's unique and could be interesting. Another game that I think of is Okami. That's not physical media, but it has a very similar system to like how I created the Game Jam game, which you can see on my itch page. It's called Follicle. You are a warrior spawned out of hair gel that is tasked with killing all the lice. It's not really a complete game. We made it in 2 days, and then I developed it again for like about a few weeks. And then I stopped to start working again because I felt like that was more interesting to me. I felt ready. Finally, and part of the reason why I'm starting to introduce this concept to my friends and the world, is because I have realized that I am in a place where I really want this to be comfortable for me to develop. And I think other people might be interested in a game like this. At least I hope, because I want to play with people. I'm trying to keep the cost down to as minimal as possible. You know, I'm making most things from scratch, but it still takes time. Takes a lot of time. Right now is a passion project that I'm extremely passionate about, but it is hard to implement a lot of time into working on it when we have life to navigate. So I started a Ko-fi page. If you're interested in supporting me and my work, it's basically Patreon, and I will share dev builds and devlog there. I'll also be sharing devlogs on YouTube. My first goal is to really be able to afford the Steam page and the developer ID for the game on Steam. And that's only $100 for me right now and my wife and our financial situation. $100 makes a difference. So that's coming eventually. But if you would like to make a donation on Ko-fi and help pay for that, that would be a huge step forward. And that being said, even the smallest amount will make a huge difference in terms of my ability to feel comfortable making this. If you can't or don't want to, but you're interested in following the project, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is most likely here, but if this is posted somewhere else, it's Davey. I'll put it on the screen. And you can follow for updates. You can watch some of my old content if you want to. It's mostly gameplay of Stalker, and it's been a couple years. But I am looking at this as like kind of the soft announcement for my game. I'm not saying anything about it yet in terms of name and story and things like that, because I want to get to that in its own video. But right now, I just wanted to introduce and kind of, this is partially for myself so that I can feel the reality of this project, because it has grown in scope, and it's weird to be sitting on this thing that you've been making that's this like really developed project and to feel like it's not real. So this is partially just so that I can feel like it's real, that what I'm doing is actually going somewhere. But if you have any questions, feel free to comment below. I would love to talk more about the game. I can't stop with my friends and family, so if you actually are interested and want to hear, maybe I should talk to you. This is the beginning of my game dev journey. Hopefully I'll have something more interesting to share visually sometime soon. Right now I haven't recorded anything to put in this video, but I'm anticipating it being like video of blueprints and like various projects I've done, but not actually the game, because right now it's pretty bare bones. I've got one environment modeled. I have a really rough human figure for all the AI that looks exactly the same. It is just the bones right now. In any case, I am just excited to share this. So thank you for watching. I hope to see you again.